Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this presentation. My name is Daniel Holmes. I represent a company called Feedzai. We're a Portuguese founded company specializing in fraud and financial crime technology with the aim of helping banks around the world protect their customers from fraud and financial crime. My role in particular at Feedzai is that I'm responsible for fraud strategy, lining into product management. So essentially, I'm here to ensure that the products that we're building both today are fit for purpose now and in the future. What I want to talk you guys through today is, first of all, giving you an update on the fraud and risk landscape, some of the things that we're seeing within our customer base and through our advisory service. What are the key challenges that we're seeing right now in the market, and hopefully some of these things will resonate with you guys. In particular, what new digital signals are we able to capture that can augment the bank's overall ability to make good risk decisions, and how that data can be combined with incumbent signals that the bank might have. So not thinking about a new point solution or a pocket of data within that user journey. How can we ensure that we're tying that all together with the things that the bank are already doing from a fraud, risk management, cyberspace to ensure that we're providing the best possible outcomes. And then we'll wrap up with a quick example of success and some takeaways that hopefully will provide good learnings for everybody that's listening in. So a few key market observations and questions. These are the combination of fraud and risk challenges, as well as challenges that the bank are having themselves, perhaps from a data management and technology capability perspective. So the first one is really maximizing the data that's available to the bank throughout the risk lifecycle. I'm going to go into some specifics on this, but the foundation of any good risk detection strategy is ensuring that you've got the best data possible, and then how you utilize that data will come afterwards. So I really want to double down on data and talk about what good looks like in this space. The second one is some of the new regulatory changes that are coming in and some of the new emerging threats that we're seeing on the market. So the biggest kind of core challenge that banks are seeing right now is an issue called authorized push payment scams. And what this means is that fraudsters are tricking customers into executing transactions on their behalf through forms of crypto scams, investment scams, romance scams, impersonation scams, etc. And typically the customer hasn't had any sort of liability protection should they fall victim to one of these, but we're really starting to see that change. We're starting to see the trend of liability moving away from the customer and towards the bank. And what that means is that the bank is now going to have a risk exposure that they don't have today. So how do they gear up in the right way to handle that challenge? And how are they going to combine that with emerging threats such as generative AI? Generative AI has got a lot of headlines recently, most recently through the emergence of tools like ChatGPT, but we're starting to see fraudsters jump on the back of this and utilize things like deepfakes, voice cloning, etc., in order to, let's say, improve the sophistication of the type of threat that the bank then has to defend. And then finally, how does the bank think about this in a couple of ways? So from a defense perspective, banks have been using AI and machine learning for a number of years, but how do they continue to ensure that they can stay as far ahead of the fraudsters as possible? And I think this comes down to two things. One is making sure that you're adopting the latest technology, but the second part of that is not overlooking the fact that there's an opportunity to sweat the asset of the incumbent capabilities that the bank has. It's not easy to take out an incumbent piece of technology, replace it. That life cycle can be 1 or 2 years. And in situations like regulatory change, new emerging threats like Gen AI, you don't always have that luxury of time. So how can you sweat the asset of what you've had already, combine that longer term with some perhaps new capabilities and put yourself in the best position to succeed? So I want to start with that question of data. And when we think about data, what I've tried to capture here is the data availability that a bank has when they're trying to make a risk decision from a fraud perspective on a user. So a hypothetical scenario here might be that this customer is trying to make a payment through her mobile device. It's perhaps a faster payment or a real-time payment to somebody in her network. Now, of course, the obvious starting point there is to think about, okay, how do I take that transaction, compare it to what this customer normally does, determine if it looks anomalous or determine if it looks normal. But there are limitations in that in terms of it's quite a single dimension in terms of the way in which you're looking at the information. And we've started to see banks really ramp up the context, right? So they can then start to think about the age of the customer, the length of relationship tenure that they have with the bank, the other products that they have, which might suggest a different type of risk profile relative to another customer that has a different set of products. How can you combine effectively the transactions that this customer makes across all of their channels? So not thinking about one system for card decisioning, one system for faster payment decisioning, really combining to get that single view so that you're understanding the customer as an entity rather than the customer as let's say a PAN number or a user ID. Other data values that have started to prove useful are non-monetary events, so understanding the customer's login patterns, for example, and any useful contextual events such as an address change prior to a new card being issued or a password reset prior to a new beneficiary being created are all going to increase the propensity of the bank being able to capture that fraud when it occurs. But the one that I want to really double down on is this one in the bottom left here called digital enrichment. How do we bring in digital enrichment services? So this is data that can be captured from the user's end device in real time without intrusion within the session, without any impact on the user journey. And on the left-hand side here, you'll start to get a sense of some of the data items that can be captured, which can then be used to fuel the risk decision. So behavioral biometrics is the concept of understanding a user's footprint by how they interact with their device. How can we liken their device interactions to something like a get analysis or a traditional biometric like a fingerprint or a facial recognition? What can we find out about the user's device? So what type of device is the user using? Why would a user be using an iPhone 14 and then suddenly log in with an iPhone 10? It wouldn't make sense for them to perhaps roll back, and that could be a sign of compromise. Is there any malware on the mobile device? Malware is a risk that we see kind of going up and down like this. It comes in, the fraudsters have some success, it's thwarted, and then the next strain and variant of malware comes back. What we want to try and do is flat align that so we've got day zero readiness. So any new malicious apps that are made available or whatever the method of download onto the device might be, we're there and prepared to be able to handle them. Combining that with location analysis, so you've got a sense of the IP address that the customer is using. But importantly, as I get into this, you'll start to see some of the spoofing capabilities, the obvious ones like your proxies, your VPN usage, etc. How do we handle that within the broader risk decision? And ensuring that this is available across all types of banking channels. So naturally, we're starting to see mobile become the dominant channel of choice for the consumer, but we shouldn't neglect the fact that web is still there and many banks and customers still prefer the browser way of interacting. So as we get into this a little bit deeper, behavioral biometrics in particular, we start to go into some of those lower level signals. So when I talk about behavioral signals, what I mean is how the user touches the screen, the size of the touch, the pressure of the touch, how the user navigates themselves through the keyboard, the speed of typing, the cadence of typing, the use of keyboard shortcuts, etc. If I'm on a desktop, on a browser, the way in which my mouse interacts, what's the speed of the mouse, the distance covered by the cursor, the number of inflection points that exist within that interaction, etc. I'm not going to go through all of these because I'm conscious there's a strong depth of data here, but hopefully this just gives you a sense of when I talk about data that can be captured from the end user device, this is the type of stuff that we're thinking about, primarily broken down into those buckets of device capability, biometric capability, and location and network capability. So collecting that data is good, but it's only good if you can do something with it from an AI and machine learning, a rule development perspective. And our approach to that here is to think about the user as an individual, rather than thinking that all users interact in the same way and they all have the same behavioral habits. So you can see in this middle pillar here, we typically think about user level models, population models, and fraudster models. So what does that mean? So per user model means how can we compare the behavior that's occurring right now in this current session in real time to the baseline that's been established for this user in the past? And that could take many forms. It could be something as simple as a new IP address being proposed by the user's web session. It could be a new device that the user's using. It could be different behavioral signals. But how do we compare that in real time using those three things as a collective, not individually? And that can be used to build trust as well. And I think that's really important. This isn't just about how we can spot anomalous risk. It's also about how we can establish trust and identity with the user. So as we take that data and analyze it in real time, we can create a number of outcomes. We can say that with a high level of confidence, this is likely to be the same user that we've seen before. because the device is the same, because the behavior is the same, etc. But we could also, through many of those different signals, perhaps determine that risk is present within that session as well. And we can give that information to the bank in order to enable them to augment their overall decisioning outcomes. Population models then start to think about how can we start to understand what's normal at the bank level, so not just at the user level, but at the bank level. And that might be something as simple as we never see any activity from a particular group of IP ranges, and all of a sudden we see a huge spike from a particular group of IPs. That could suggest that there's a bot attack or an automated attack, or perhaps some interaction with a malware command and control center. There's a bunch of ways in which population models can be useful. And then fraudster models is taking those non-fraud events. So as we retrospectively understand and confirm which events were fraud, how do we take that intelligence of what non-fraudster behavior looks like and put that back into the learning, so that if we see that behavior again, we can spot it. And what that allows us to do then is think about fraud as a broader entity rather than just as a single channel. So what I mean by that is combining that behavioral data with transaction data is what's ultimately going to give the bank the best view of risk for that individual. So banks have been doing transaction monitoring for a number of years. It's typically the core, the fulcrum of any fraud strategy within an institution. They'll take that payment, they'll compare it to norm, they'll compare it for thresholds, they'll compare it to non-frauds, and they'll make a decision. But combining behavioral signals with that really gives the bank an opportunity to improve what they're doing. Actually, at FeedZai, what we're doing is unique on the market by trying to combine these two in real time, looking at scaled, profiled, rolling periods of time to establish the best view of the individual. So how this might work is that if you look at the transaction in isolation, the transaction might look okay, but if you can see that the device that's being used is one that's been used to commit fraud a number of times in the past, then that transactional outcome can change from a good outcome to a bad outcome. But the reverse is also true as well. So you can have a situation where the transaction might look a little bit different to what the norm is for that user. But if we can see there's a significant amount of trust from the user's digital signals, we can override that potential false positive that might have come out of the transaction system. And typically in fraud, you're thinking about two core KPIs. One, the amount of fraud that can be detected, and two, the level of friction and false positive that's put in the user journey for good customers. This is a genuine opportunity to address both of these challenges. So finding more fraud by leveraging data that you didn't previously have access to, but making sure that good customers continue to get a smooth ride by using those same signals in a slightly different way. So that's very much what we see as the, let's say, the gold standard of detection across all the regions that we work in. So that's the UK, Europe, US, and over in Asia Pacific as well. And then this allows us to get into a lower level and understand some of the specific fraud typologies that this combination that you can see in the middle allows you to uncover. So we're thinking about this right through the user life cycle. We're not thinking about a point in time decision, which we then forget, and then we make another point in time decision. It's about continuous authentication and continuous risk assessment, not just through the user's current life cycle of session, but through their historic life cycle of session as well. And you can see traditionally transaction information has been very good for things like scam detection, first party detection, account takeover detection. Layering digital trust into that combination as well then presents the opportunity to find even more fraud typologies. So uncovering malware, uncovering remote account takeover or RAT attacks through use of TeamViewer, AeroAdmin, etc., etc. And then in the middle, you've got this combination of account takeover, which is third-party compromise. So this combination of digital signals and transaction is what we believe gives the broadest opportunity to capture a holistic set of fraud threats that could well present themselves. So what I wanted to do is just finish with a quick example. This is, I guess, a small case study from our side. I mentioned a number of times throughout the session that we're thinking about two things: one, finding more fraud, but two, establishing more trust. And it really depends on what the bank's challenge is when we go in and implement something like digital trust as to how we would set it up, how we would tune it, how we would develop it, how would we set up the risk strategy in order to help the bank meet that preferred outcome. This particular bank were actually quite happy with the level of fraud that they were finding, but they were unhappy with the number of false positives that were coming out of the system. What I can see here is that what we were able to achieve is that the value of the fraud detected stayed the same, but through layering in and developing trust through the user's digital footprint, we were able to reduce the false positives by 30%. So by establishing trust in that user's digital identity, we're able to remove false positives from the transactional engine and improve the overall user experience in a significant number of sessions. So in terms of key takeaways, what I would say is, if there's 3 things to take away from today. Number 1, complete the full customer risk and trust view within rich digital signals. So think about what digital signals you have in terms of what can be captured and how that can be laid in effectively with what you already have within your banking institution. Number 2, leverage your digital signals, not just at a point in time, but throughout the life cycle. So make sure that we're comparing the current to the norm. Make sure that we're thinking about continuously capturing data throughout the session. Risk can look good at the start of a session at the point of login, but it can quickly change if a malware or a rat becomes active by the point the user wants to make a payment. So point in time decisions don't cut it. It's continuous throughout that session. And then number 3 is use that data in a way that suits your risk appetite. Don't assume that it's all just about fraud detection or all just about trust development. It can be very much true on both sides of that fence. So that would be the 3 key takeaways. Use the data in a way that's fit for purpose for your bank and use it to solve the problems that are inherent to you. Not all banks have the same challenges. We respect that, but we think that the digital signals I've discussed today can be used to solve multiple problems, independent of what your challenges are as an individual institution. So I hope that was a useful kind of whistle stop of digital trust, using it for good, using it for bad. You see my contact details here. If there's anything I can do to assist anybody further, any question, trivial or complex, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you very much for listening.